All right, so we're back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Cory Doctorow, who is a writer, activist, and journalist. He works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, writes a newsletter at pluralistic.net, and is the author of the recently published book, Enshittification. Cory, thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So I've recommended enshittification to a lot of people. I've posted about it on our Substack. I came to see you speak with Lina Khan last week at Columbia.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so no, the book has been very much on my radar. It's really gotten me thinking. But start us off just explaining what is the basic thesis of enshittification? What are you putting forth in this book?
So, to understand the context for this, I have worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a digital rights group working on making sure that human rights transition to the internet, and these days that the internet doesn't confiscate all the human rights that we have in the non-internet. And the job of getting people to care about tech policy questions before they've become very urgent and maybe irreparable is the job of coming up with metaphors and similes and parables and analogies. And this is one of those. This is a framing device for understanding a specific kind of tech policy. And the tech policy that it aims to explore is how and why the platforms that we rely on have all taken such a precipitous dive and gotten so much worse in recent times. And then, of course, what to do about it. So it contains an observation about the characteristic pattern of platform decay, that platforms are first good to their end users, and then they find a way to lock those users in. And then once those users are locked in and it's hard for them to leave, the platforms make things worse for those users in order to tempt in business customers who are also locked in. And once it's hard for them to leave, the platform turns the screws on them too and scrapes out all the value except for whatever kind of mingy homeopathic residue is needed to keep the users locked to the platform, the business is locked to the users, and everything else is harvested for the firm's investors and executives. But the most important part of enshittification is its theory about why this is happening now. What happened to the sources of discipline that punished companies if they were bad, how they were dismantled, and how we can restore them so that we don't need perfect people running companies, and we don't need to be perfectly precise shoppers who only choose good firms in order to make sure that we aren't horribly exploited and have our private data stolen and our money stolen and our labor stolen by billionaires running monopolies.
Yeah, so I mean, I see all these examples that you reference in the book in my real life when I'm using meta kind of platforms, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, when I'm using X, even, rideshare apps like Uber. But I'm wondering, when did you first started to notice this phenomenon of enshittification? Like, what was the kind of the catalyst for everything?
Well, I mean, there isn't really a catalyst. I'm sorry to say. It would be very neat if there was a kind of story where I woke up one morning and said, "This can't go on," and I've just noticed this. And in fact, it's been 25 years of advocating on these issues,
Mm.
and what I've observed all along that time is that sometimes platforms would fall into management who would abuse them and make them worse, but those platforms historically failed. Right, when they got worse, they went away. Alta Vista got replaced by Google, MySpace got replaced by Facebook, and so on. And that over time, as firms became more consolidated and more insulated from consequence, they were able to make themselves worse without facing those consequences, and that they shambled on there. I call them zombie platforms, right? And I don't know that there was a turning point for that. I think that it was a gradual recession of the consequences of bad action that caused these firms to gradually wake up to the possibility that they could act worse and worse without getting harmed. So you can imagine a model of a firm as containing factions, some of whom believe that they could be greedier and be worse and still come out ahead on balance, that the fines that they would pay to a regulator, or the customers they would lose, or the workers who would quit, or the new market entrants who'd be tempted into the market as a result of the opportunity that they created by making their product worse, that those would on balance be less consequential than the additional profit that could be reaped by turning screws. And you also have a faction that is either more risk averse or more ethical, and doesn't want to make things worse because they fear the consequences or they dread the moral consequences of it. They would feel bad about themselves for doing this. And you have this kind of iterated game in which those two factions are continuously battling one another as a series of micro decisions about how platforms should be designed, how products should be designed, what rules should be imposed, how fees should be structured, and so on. And what starts to happen is whenever the bad guys are in charge, they win, right? And so, like, the Meta just got a giant, or Amazon just got a giant fine for tricking people into signing up for Prime. And it's very hard to prove this kind of thing, but it turns out that Amazon did a bunch of research on how the sign up flow for Prime worked. And what they found is that consistently, if they made it so that people understood that they were signing up for Prime and for a recurring charge, that they got fewer Prime signups, and that the people who were signing up for Prime didn't know they were doing it. Right? They were misreading or being deceived by a kind of ambiguous thing that said, "Would you like free shipping for this parcel?" And
Man,
what they didn't
that
understand is they were
is,
signing up for it. And so they knew, right? They had A/B tested it. They said, "Okay, well, we're going to show a million users this sign up flow. We're going to show a million users this sign up flow, and then we're going to measure emails from people trying to cancel it, and we're going to maybe poll some of them. We'll do some focus groups." And they just knew that they were cheating people, right? And so, when in the FTC record on this, you see the people who are commissioned to do the research kind of showing up to the product planning group and saying, "Hey, so we did that research you asked us to do, and it turns out people really are being tricked by this ambiguous sign up flow, and we're stealing money from them. So I guess we're not doing that anymore, right?" And the other people who ultimately won the argument were like, "Why would we stop doing this? You're saying that we should voluntarily adopt a program that would result in fewer recurring revenue sources for us? That sounds like a really stupid plan. Like, what's the downside here?" And it turns out the downside is you get like one FTC fine, but it's not, and that FTC fine is mostly contingent on people applying for refunds, and we know, like, from class action universe, that most people don't, and so they're just gonna get away with it, right? And so you can just see that, like, over time, the devil on your left shoulder starts to out argue the angel on your right, whether that's individually within the impulses of an executive, including very powerful ones like Mark Zuckerberg, who controls the majority of voting shares in Facebook, and also factionally within firms.
yeah, and I mean, so you cite numerous examples within the tech field, but as I was reading it, I just kept thinking of so many examples that transcend big tech. I mean, you think of
Mm-hmm.
the quality of food when you think about like the production of physical products, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
houses, whether it's cars or
Yeah,
whatever.
my washing machine just broke this morning. It's 7 years old,
Exactly.
and it's
No, but
probably not repairable. Yeah,
but that's the thing. It's like you see that everything is turning to
yeah.
shit precisely because of this kind of like trajectory that you map out in the book. And I think that like part of it has to do with policy. Part of it has to do with all these things that you delineate. That like there's the lack of antitrust regulation. There's a lack of, consequences for foul play.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there's like a cultural, aesthetic, or even spiritual dimension to this where like, I don't know, we've kind of
Hmm.
lost the sense that things are sacred, that things should have a meaning, a true value that serve, you know, some higher ideal. And I was thinking in particular, this came to mind. So Pasolini's film, 120 Days of Sodom, based on Marquis de Sade, there's this
Hmm.
infamous scene where the people are forced to eat shit. And I
Hmm.
mean, I couldn't help but think of that because, I mean, first the title of the book, but also like when you think about the quality of food today, that like we
Right.
have all this artificial stuff that like is definitely not good for our bodies. It's because, again, part of it's because legally these companies are allowed to put that into food, but also, again, we have lost the sense of the sacredness of a meal, that it's supposed to be something that nourishes your body, but also that like brings people together, that has like a real
Hmm.
meaning. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious if you have anything to
Hmm.
say about like the process of enshittification beyond the tech industry, and also like
Well,
just the cultural dimension to it.
yeah. So look, I'm close enough to being a Marxist, although I'm not a Marxist, that
Yeah.
I am a staunch materialist,
Okay.
and I think that ideology is downstream of material
Hmm.
reality, and I think that there are people in our world who never held those things sacred.
Mhm.
And that what's happened is they've started to organize our society. So I don't know that it's an ideological shift as much as a power shift, right?
Mhm.
The people who have the, I think that like if you ask someone, should your washing machine last 7 years before becoming permanent waste, right? There's no one buying a washing machine who's like, there'll probably be some really cool features for washing machines in 7 years. I don't mind if I have to throw this one away in 7 years.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you get that argument about like cell phones or something,
Mhm.
but no one says that about washing machines or dishwashers or cars or whatever. If you say like, should my Tesla come with a battery that can drive 300 miles, but unless I pay a subscription, it'll only let me drive 150 miles, right? No one's like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great feature. I want a car that has a giant battery in it that actually reduces its efficiency because of the weight, but which I can't access unless I pay a recurring subscription charge, right?
Mhm.
This is just not. I don't think it is ideological, and I think that to the extent that that ideology is permeating, right, which Jay Rosen I think it was after 9/11, he came up with this phrase, "Don't savvy me." No, it was after Snowden. Don't savvy me,
Mhm.
where you would say, like, Edward Snowden has revealed that all of our communications are being hoovered up by the NSA and weaponized against us. And there would be a kind of response that was like, well, what do you expect? That's how things go, right? Were you an idiot that you didn't know that? And this is what "don't savvy me" refers to, because it's a way of positing yourself or dangling yourself out there as like a sophisticated actor who knows better and knows the way of the world and blah blah blah. It's very cheap. It's very transparent. And I think that it's also a defense mechanism in a world in which you're always being spied on, right? And so in the same way, I think that like if you show up for work every day and your boss is like, I've come up with 7 new ways to torment the people who rely on your labor, and
Mhm.
it's your job to implement it, and there's 5 people who'll take that job if you quit. Uh, uh, and also, I'm pretty convinced that this chatbot can do your job, and whether or not it can, I'm gonna insist that it might, and you have to contend with the possibility that I'll fire you and replace you with chatbot, whether or not it can do your job. Because frankly, I don't give a shit,
Yeah.
right? And that I think maybe makes people cynical, right? I often think about I often think about the fact that when Facebook, or rather when iOS, when Apple added a tick box to the operating system for the iPhone that would allow you to block Facebook tracking,
Mhm.
that 96% of users clicked it, right? And like I always say, the other 4% were either drunk or Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees, which checks because if I was a Facebook employee, I'd be drunk all the time. But it, it tells you something about this neoliberal fantasy about revealed preferences,
Yeah.
that when people do things, it's because they are ideologically actually in harmony with them, that people do the things that they mean to do, and
Mhm.
that it's paternalistic to say, oh, you signed up for Facebook and you're being spied on, but you don't really want to be spied on because you have revealed your preference for being spied on. And this is kind of like, oh yeah, I've observed a lot of people selling their kidneys to make rent. I guess they have a revealed preference for having one kidney,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So, but I mean, but I want to get into this because, like, I understand you're saying so, like, you're coming at this as a materialist, and that I don't know, like, because when I see your argument for the need for regulation, for legal restrictions on these companies and their business practices, my initial reaction as someone who's coming from kind of more like a spiritual, metaphysical worldview is to say, okay, like human beings are inclined towards corruption. We're sinful. If you don't put any barrier, if you don't put any restriction, even people with the best intentions are going to do messed up things. And you show that, like these platforms start out promising some really great product that's going to make your life better. So even beneath the facade of something very benevolent, that that bent towards corruption, towards manipulation is going to come out. And this is why we need regulation. This is why we can't just let people, you can't just have laissez-faire. But I mean, but I want to hear like, how would you approach this? I mean, if you're coming at it from a more materialist point of view, this case for to put regulations in place in order to protect people from this bent towards corruption.
Well, I don't think that there's like a way to put regulation in place. I think it's
Yeah.
always historically contingent.
Hmm.
Obviously, it's easier when you don't have monopolies, right? The
Yeah.
historic rubric for monopoly enforcement was that it's very hard to reverse monopolization because firms that acquire a monopoly can outmaneuver the government that's supposed to be regulating them,
Mhm.
right? The referee has to be more powerful than the players on the pitch.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll never keep the game fair. I always tell my libertarian friends this, that like, even if you think the only job the government has is to enforce contracts, then they have to be powerful enough to enforce those contracts, which means they have to be able to give orders and make them stick to every party to every possible contract, which means that the largest corporation that you're willing to tolerate determines the smallest government you're capable of having,
Mhm.
right? And so, you know, the in a world in which we have these monopolies where it's very hard to regulate, even when we convict Google of being a monopolist, the judge in that case, in the first of the three antitrust cases that Google lost, when it came to the sentencing, what in antitrust we call the remedy phase, the judge sentenced them to nothing. He was like, yes, I found you guilty of having a monopoly. Your sentence is nothing.
Yeah.
Like even said that they could go on paying Apple $20 billion plus a year not to enter the search market, because he was like, well, I don't want to impose downstream harms on Apple customers who would miss out on cool new iPhone features that might emerge if Apple can continue to extract a $20 billion bribe not to make a search engine from Google every year. It's just the most outrageous
Yeah.
reasoning. Ireland, which is where all the privacy cases in Europe go because all the tech companies pretend they're Irish. Ireland just appointed a new data commissioner who's an ex-Meta executive. In the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority just fired their very effective head, this guy Marcus Bokerink, and Keir Starmer replaced him with the former head of Amazon UK, this guy called Doug Gurr. Right? Like it's very very hard. So in that world, right, in the world that embodies the punchline of that joke from Nova Scotia, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. What do you do?
Yeah.
And I think that there are a couple of big structural ways that we could start to unwind the power of these firms. Um, one refers to a law that's missing, and the other refers to a law that shouldn't be there. So
Mhm.
one's a regulation story, one's a deregulation story.
Yeah.
So the missing law is privacy law. In America, we haven't had a new privacy law since 1988. The last consumer privacy law to make it out of Congress is a law that bans video store clerks from disclosing your VHS rentals. We haven't had another one since. This is why they can spy on you, right? I say, like, the reason tech firms spy on you is the same reason your dog licks its balls. It's because they can, right? No
Yeah.
one makes them stop. And so, what do we do about that? Well, there are a lot of people who are very angry about things that they don't think are privacy things, but actually are downstream from the lack of privacy.
Mhm.
And by coalescing them around privacy as the maybe necessary but insufficient precondition for dealing with the thing they're angry about, we can build a coalition that can actually maybe get privacy law over the line. It's come pretty close in several successive sessions of Congress, but always foundered because corporate monopolies have sabotaged the bills. So if you think about what that coalition consists of, it's like everyone who thinks that Grampy is a QAnon because of Facebook, everyone who thinks their kid is anorexic because of Instagram, everyone who thinks their millennials are quoting Osama bin Laden because of TikTok, everyone who's worried about AI deepfake porn, everyone who's worried about racial discrimination in hiring and lending and housing, everyone who's worried about the cops rounding up everyone at the January 6th riots or at an anti-ICE demonstration because they get their location data off of Google, right? That's the coalition for a new privacy law. Hilariously, Congress just voted through a new privacy law, but it only affects Congress, not even congressional staffers. It
Wow.
bans data brokers from selling data on sitting congressmen and senators, but
Mhm.
not their staffers and not state lawmakers, including like state lawmakers who have recently been assassinated by people who got their home addresses from a data broker,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so, this is the coalition that maybe we can bring to bear. And then there's this other law that shouldn't exist. So in 1998, Bill Clinton signed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and it's a law that prohibits what's called circumvention. That means changing how a technology works without permission from the manufacturer. And so this would be like altering your phone to take a third-party app store, altering your printer to accept third-party ink, altering your tractor so that you can fix it, and then you don't need to pay John Deere to come out and type the unlock code in after you make the repair, altering your ventilator so the hospital can fix it without waiting for Medtronic to come out and type an unlock code in to bless the repair, altering your iPhone to take any app store, altering your Xbox to take any app store, altering your iPhone so anyone can fix it, altering your car so that it can be fixed by any mechanic and not just one that's paying $10,000 a year for a diagnostic tool. All that stuff is illegal because we passed this law that said going like changing software without permission from the manufacturer is illegal even if you do it for a
Yeah.
legal purpose. And the reason America signed up for that law is because there were a bunch of American firms that wanted to use it to extract rent, just rip you off, right? So like printer ink is now $10,000 a gallon. But the reason other countries signed up for this is more complicated. By and large, America is the only country that exports these technologies in any great measure. And so while the American public gets screwed by these companies, the American stock market benefits from that screwing.
Yeah.
But abroad, there's just the screwing, right? It's
Yeah.
not like their stock markets are filled like their equivalent of the S&P 500, like the FTSE 500, is not filled with British firms that are using this to reap monopoly profits or monopoly rents. It's just you have this consumer surplus being drained off by American tech monopolies because British law makes it illegal for a British firm to counter them. And the reason for that is that the US Trade Representative for the last quarter century has made it their top priority to insist that countries adopt these laws
Mhm.
under threat of tariffs. So
Yeah.
they said, either you have this law or we're going to hit you with tariffs. And obviously, this is not a threat that matters in the same way now, right? If someone says, do as I tell you or I'll burn your house down, and you do it and they burn your house down, you're kind of a sucker if you keep doing what they told you.
Yeah.
And so there is this unique moment now, and Trump just keeps making the case for legalizing what's called jailbreaking, right? Changing how a device works so that it works with third-party tools. So he's made it really clear, for example, that America no longer has allies or trading partners; it has rivals, and that rivalry will be pursued through the weaponization of American tech platforms.
Mhm.
So recently, when the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor swore out an arrest warrant for Bibi Netanyahu for his participation in genocide, Trump denounced this, and Microsoft obliged him
Yeah.
by terminating his Outlook account. So he lost all of his documents, his calendar, his address book, and his email archives. So you have the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court no longer able to access the files of the International Criminal Court. And this has prompted the European Union to start funding something called Eurostack, which
Mhm.
is replicas of American tech silos, but that are open source and that can be locally hosted and can be sovereign. And the problem they're going to run into with this is that no one in a government ministry is going to copy and paste a million documents from Office 365 into the Eurostack,
Yeah.
right? You need export tools, and they're not going to provide them. And so that is going to require jailbreaking, right? To forcibly
Yeah.
extract data. And so, how do you do this? Well, you go around to countries and you say, Donald Trump will cut you off at the knees with American tech unless you get your data out of it right now. If you're the first country to do this, your tech sector can reap a gigantic industrial structuring bonus where you can consume the accumulated billions of monopoly rents of American tech firms and use them as fuel for a single use rocket to boost your own tech sector into a stable orbit that can export those tools to everyone in the world, including Americans who are very hard done by these technologies, right? And who can escape them by buying your tools and downloading them over the internet. And that is like it's a very effective way of approaching trade war,
Mhm.
right? Rather than getting like upset about Elon Musk's Nazi salute, which just gives him the attention he obviously
Yeah.
craves. You make it legal for every mechanic in the world to jailbreak every Tesla and unlock all the software subscriptions and upgrades,
Mhm.
and not give any of the money for it to Elon Musk, right? Like that really like kicks him in the dongle, hits him where it hurts, right? And
Yeah.
so that's how you make this case, and you wait for one country to break. So you have a much more target-rich environment.
Mhm.
In the American internet, which is now dying, the only way you could change this would be to change the rules in America. In the post American internet, which is now being born, you just have to find one country that is willing to take that risk. And when they break, the whole system falls apart.
Yeah, no, and I just want to point out that before you start proposing these kind of solutions, these responses to what's going on in the book, like you preface it with like you cite Margaret Thatcher's line that, there is no alternative, this fatalistic
Hmm.
kind of lie that neoliberalism pushes, that this is the way it is, there's no way out, so let's just embrace it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
like asking for water that's not wet.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So no, I mean you give all these possible responses, advocating for antitrust policy and regulation, but then I also think we have to look at like the more concrete, immediate solutions that everyday people can look to that, and I posted this in the on Substack that I said that Catherine Judge's book Direct is a very good complement to Enshittification
sure.
because she focuses on, for example, like buying your food from a farm share, buying local rather than
Yeah.
Amazon. Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah, what do you
I
think?
like her very much.
Yeah.
Catherine is married to my old friend Tim Wu, whose book comes out today. I've
Okay.
known Tim Wu since we were in the third grade together.
Oh wow.
So,
Way
and
back.
I think very highly of Catherine Judge, and I think that book about intermediaries is really good. But I don't think consumption choices make systemic differences.
You don't. Okay. So if I
I
boycott Amazon to buy from the local bookstore,
You might make your life better, and you will certainly make life better for the people who run that bookstore, but you're not going to change the role that Jeff Bezos
okay.
plays in
Yeah.
structuring our economy, right? This is like trying to recycle your way out of the climate emergency, right?
Mm,
And
okay.
moreover, while there is some value to this, a little goes a long way, right? There's a great book. So Zephyr Teachout. So this is the
Yes.
extended Tim Wu universe, right? So Tim Wu
Hmm.
ran for governor of a lieutenant governor of New York when Zephyr Teachout was running for governor. He was her running mate. And Zephyr Teachout, she wrote this book called Break 'em Up. And in the last chapter, Break 'em Up, she's got a section on consumption choices, voting with your wallet. And she says, by all means, do it if you can do it and if it'll make your life better or the life better of someone that you care about. But don't kid yourself that you're making a difference, and don't do it just because. Like, if there's a giant protest at the Amazon warehouse, but you're like, I can't make my sign with markers from Amazon, and you drive around for 2 hours looking for an artisanal family owned stationer and
Mm,
you miss the demonstration, Jeff Bezos wins. Like, if you don't like Twitter,
okay.
get on Blue Sky, but don't endlessly agonize about whether it's better to be on Blue
Okay.
Sky or Twitter. And
Interesting.
certainly don't make the mistake of thinking that the people who are on Twitter are part of the problem, right? The reason they're on Twitter is because the people they care about are there and they have a collective action problem to solve. And we can solve that problem with policy, we can solve it with technology, but you're not going to solve it with shame. And the best
Mm,
you can hope for is to shame people, or for Elon Musk to degrade people's lives to the point where they have no alternative but to surrender the benefits they get from being a part of a vibrant community, a community of care and a community of solidarity,
yeah.
and walking away from Twitter and never recovering it. Right? Yeah, people in a dictatorship can leave. It's true. Like, they could become refugees and go somewhere else. Don't kid yourself that that is fixing their problems. Right? It is
Mm,
merely the only thing you can do when you run out of other things to do.
yeah. So you don't boycott Amazon.
I think organized boycotts, BDS, by all means,
Okay.
right? Individual consumption choices, nonsense.
No. Okay. So, I mean, because the thing about Catherine's book that attracted me, besides the kind of like moral, political argument in favor of going local, is that I do think back to this issue of like the cultural aesthetic issue that like if I buy from a local bookstore rather than Amazon, I'm happier because I'm meeting actual people who live in the
Sure,
community. I
do
mean,
it.
I think there's something there, but I
That's
ultimately
not
I
an
know.
argument. So my
Yeah.
argument is not an argument
Yeah.
against
Of
patronizing your
course.
local bookstore. I am a
Of course.
recovering bookseller. By all means,
Okay.
shop at your local bookstore. But don't say, well, I guess I'm not going to read books this month because my local bookstore is 50 miles away
Yeah.
and the only way to get the book is on Amazon.
Well,
Or you get it
yeah.
on Bookshop if you want. Like, fine. But, if like, just don't like doing that makes a difference to the life of the people who work at Bookshop. It doesn't make a difference to the structural problems
Yeah.
in our society of having it dominated by Amazon. An
Mm.
organized boycott might, right? But
Yeah.
like, Martin Luther King was not like, okay, everyone, just wherever you find yourself, if the bus company is owned by white people that discriminates against black people, just don't ride the bus. right? He was like, we are going to organize a bus
Yeah.
boycott in Memphis on this day after this precipitating event that we planned with Rosa Parks as part of a coordinated strategy that has like media and like
Mhm.
articulated demands and a theory of change, and is not about just like how you get to work in the morning. It's about how
Well,
you
yeah.
participate in a polity. And look, if you've got like an hour to spend today, and you can either spend it by like joining a local political group and being a part of it and getting involved in doorbell knocking or phone banking or organizing a demonstration or something else that is political and meaningful, or even just like working at the food bank. And your other alternative is like driving half an hour in one direction and driving half an hour in the other direction to buy something from a mom and pop store instead of getting it delivered by Amazon. Do the thing that creates the bond of solidarity, right? Like, don't just have the thing of where it's like, oh, I met a guy at the cash register who's a committed bookseller and loves books. Do the thing where it's like, oh, I met my neighbors and we formed a mutual aid network that will
Yeah.
help us to resist fascism.
Okay, so then this brings me to the question that, I mean, you do address earlier on in the book of symbolic kind of activism or symbolic issues, which as you're kind of saying now is a lot of people will do this to kind of gratify their conscience. It's a moral masturbation, for lack of a better term.
Or just a
Um,
misplaced, or just like being brainwashed by 40 years of neoliberalism that tells you to vote with your wallet, which is the thing
yeah,
billionaires love because their wallets are bigger than
but
yours.
but this is precisely the issue that like a lot of us, because we have good intentions, will pursue these very symbolic, very again
Yeah.
performative issues which do nothing to substantially change the status quo. And I think this is
Yeah.
something I see, especially with people my age. Like we love hashtag resistance, hashtag whatever, put all the emojis in the bio. But to your point, like what are we actually doing? The actual work of disrupting the status quo is not glamorous. It's not always fun. Um, but again, I
And
fear
look,
that
I think the job of an
yeah.
organizer is to figure out how to use that sentiment as the top of a
Mhm.
funnel, right? And say, okay, well, you've put a hashtag up, you've changed your Twitter
Mhm.
icon. What do I do now that I see you doing this and telling me as an organizer that you
Yeah.
want to make a change? What do I do to recruit you and make you part of the movement? Right. That's the I think that's the next phase.
But would you say that it's like within the interest of big tech and big power that people pursue these kinds of symbolic issues, given that like it does,
Only to the
do you
extent that
think
they
your
then
change
don't
should,
do
yeah,
more, right? Only
yeah,
to the extent that they don't do more. I look, I mean, I have spent my whole life trying to get people to show up in person for protests and
mhm,
so on. You know, one of the things I say when people are like, what if we all just got off the internet? You know, I grew up in Toronto, like all the best Americans. I'm Canadian, and and I spent many very cold winter nights riding a bicycle around the streets of Toronto with a bucket of wheat paste and a stack of flyers, sticking them up to telephone poles, hoping to get people out to a
yeah,
protest. And you know, if you have never spent a night in sub-zero weather with a bucket of wheat paste, getting water and flour down your shirt in -10 C weather, then you have no business saying that we can organize a revolution without without the internet, right? It's a very important phenomenon and a very important organizing tool. And so I think we have to perfect it.
okay.
I think we have to figure out how to take the parts that we like, leave the parts that we don't. Uh, you know, give a rebuke to the Thatcherism of there is no alternative, and say absolutely there is an alternative. I can have a conversation with my friends without Mark Zuckerberg listening in. I can search the web without Sundar Pichai knowing what kind of underwear I'm buying, et cetera, et cetera. You
Yeah,
know,
and I mean, this brings me to, when I saw you last week with Lina Khan, I mean, she comes up in Enshittification. She also comes up in Catherine Judge's book. And I
yeah,
mean, the fact that at least in my circles, very few people, like she's not on that many people's radar.
yeah,
And that's for a reason that like these, big media companies, if they're not trashing her, suppress any coverage of her,
yeah.
but amplify, again, these more symbolic issues. People get up in arms about them. But
Well,
people
and the
who are,
Biden administration, but also the Biden administration didn't like that it was forced to do this by the left wing of the party.
yeah,
They didn't run on it. They didn't campaign on it. They barely mentioned it. Uh, when Harris's billionaire backers went public and said the first thing Harris has to do when she wins the election is fire Lina Khan. She didn't tell them to fuck off.
Yeah.
So I mean, the Democrats, like the Republicans, it's a coalition, and
Yeah.
it tells you something about the strength of the left of the coalition, the
Mhm.
anti-corporate wing of the coalition, that Biden felt that he had to appoint these extremely competent trustbusters, Khan, Cantor, Chopra, and so on, to run these, as well as his National Labor Relations Board staff and people like Jennifer Abruzzo. But the fact that he didn't talk about it and boast about it, that it wasn't the thing that they campaigned on, that he wasn't doing what Trump is doing about ICE, right?
Mhm.
Like ICE, Trump is out there every day, as is his cabinet, saying like, look at all the people ICE is fucking up, and we never had Biden showing up every day. We never had
Mhm.
his secretaries showing up every day, his cabinets showing up every day, and going like, look at all the corporations Biden is fucking up. Look at all the bullies and the ripoffs that we are fucking up for you, right? So that's what you do if you're proud of what your administration is doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's like it continues to shock me that like people don't know that there are people in
Yeah,
power who are, like that to me is like when I've posted about her, people are like, who is this woman? Everybody
yeah,
knows who Trump, who Mamdani, who all whatever, like the big names, but it's like the people who are actually doing things to disrupt the status quo. It's like we keep that, or power tries to keep that on the down low.
yeah.
But anyway, so just to wrap things up. So I mean, you've given us plenty of suggestions of what we can actually do to change the situation, to say change this power structure substantially and not in a purely, surface level way. But I want to ask like more on a personal level, like what gives you hope in the face of how shitty everything is becoming? Like what keeps you going?
Well, the thing that gives me hope is that there has been this incredible upsurge of anti corporate regulation around the world. And
Mhm.
regulators don't act in a vacuum, right? That you have regulators who have views, right, like Khan or Cantor or Chopra, but they don't get put into office and given the resources to pursue an agenda just because of their convictions,
Yeah.
right? That phenomenon is downstream of a shift in the way that the political winds are blowing.
Mhm.
And the antitrust surge in America didn't start under Biden. It actually started under Trump 1. He brought the cases against the Facebook and Google. And it didn't stop in the US. In fact, it didn't even start in the US. When Trump was doing this, we already had, the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act underway in Europe, these negotiations for these big, ambitious regulations there. You had the Competition and Markets Authority, which is the British competition regulator, the one whose leader was just replaced with the head of the former head of Amazon UK. They were doing the more work in the 5 years that preceded that than they'd done in the 50 that preceded that. And that was under not a leftist government, it was under these conservative governments, and not just conservative governments, but like the most dysfunctional conservative governments in British history, like
Mhm.
prime minister every 6 months. One didn't outlast a head of lettuce. And here is this agency just doing this incredible work. European member states, Germany, France, Spain, they took big swings at big tech and also at other kinds of monopolies, as did Australia, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan.
Yeah.
Canada, where we've had the worst competition regulator in the world. Our competition regulator had only challenged 3 mergers in its whole history and had never successfully challenged a merger. In
Mhm.
2024, Justin Trudeau, who's historically been very deferential to corporate power, whipped his caucus to pass a bill that gave them the widest reaching enforcement powers of any competition regulator in the world and a giant budget to use them. And in China, there was like very big muscular antitrust action,
Mhm.
because the Chinese state doesn't view Chinese tech companies as an arm of the state. It views them as competitors. And
Yeah.
so that gives me hope. Something has changed
Mhm.
in the political winds. This is very exciting.
And just a last thought, because you're mentioning, like you said this when last week at Columbia that, you see, okay, the Biden administration brings Khan in, but then you have people like JD Vance praising Khan. You have these quote
Mhm.
unquote conservatives. Um, do you think there's the possibility for a left-right coalition against big power and, in favor of regulation? Like, do you think that could really be forged?
So I think that there are elements of the Republican coalition who are reachable. I don't think that Josh Hawley or Matt Gaetz or JD Vance are among them. I
Mm,
think that they have already shown that while they have some instincts about corporate power, concentration being dangerous,
yeah,
that they also have a ranked set of priorities, and that instinct is at the bottom of the ranked set of priorities,
yeah,
and that they are much closer to the Donald Trump version of antitrust, which is that if there's a corporation that's doing something you don't like,
yeah.
whether or not it harms the American people,
Hmm.
you threaten them with antitrust enforcement. This is actually something Xi Jinping is very good at.
Yeah,
In 2013, Xi Jinping embarked on a set of anti corruption purges, and he fired and, in some cases, arrested a lot of regional officials. And there was this big question: was Xi rather going after his political rivals, or was he pursuing genuine corruption? And it turns out the answer is yes to both,
mm,
because all the officials that he targeted were corrupt. And there's some empirical ways to look at that. You look at what regional development banks, what kind of loans they issue, and whether they're to related parties and how those loans perform. And you
yeah,
can make an estimation of the degree of corruption in those local officials. So all of the officials that he targeted were corrupt, but he only targeted the corrupt officials in his adversaries' orbits,
mm,
right, in their power base. And it is entirely possible to pursue anti corruption in a corrupt way. And in fact, if you are corrupt,
mm,
it is to your advantage for everyone else to be corrupt, because it means you don't have to manufacture a pretext for crackdowns. You can use the legitimate fact of their corruption as the basis for your crackdown.
mm. Interesting. Wow, wow. So yeah, it's a provocative point to leave off on, but this is
Yeah.
why I strongly recommend everyone pick up a copy of Enshittification.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, anything else, Corey, that you want to plug before we go?
No, well, I guess I'll say I write when I'm anxious, and these are anxious times. So I wrote 9 books during lockdown.
Wow.
Many of them have come out, more are coming out. There's been lots of novels. I write science fiction
Yeah.
novels. If you like this stuff and you want to hear how it works in fiction, you can pick up those novels. But also, over the summer, I wrote a book about the coming AI bubble collapse, what the material basis for the AI bubble was and is,
Mhm.
and what to do after the bubble, called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. It'll be published by my publisher, Farrar, Straus and Giroux, part of Macmillan, in June. And
Awesome.
so I think that'll be up for pre-order soon. I turned in the second draft yesterday, so it should be
Exciting.
in production like today, and getting ready, for publication in June.
Awesome. So we'll look out for that. And Corey, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. It was lovely to chat with you, Stephen.
You too.